Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and if my voice sounds a little tired, it's because it is. I am fresh off the plane from Austin, Texas. I was there for CrimeCon. It was amazing. More on that very soon. I've got audio from my time there that I'm going to share in either a future or a bonus episode, so stay tuned. You will hear much more about CrimeCon Austin, for sure. But for now, I want to continue the conversation that we've been having around personal safety. Also, quick reminder, we are still in the book giveaway, The Power of Awareness, from last week's interview. So if you have listened to that, go ahead and follow me on Twitter or Instagram at DialoguePod for a chance to win Dan Schilling's book. And if you haven't yet listened to that episode, go back and listen, then follow me on Instagram or Twitter. Leave me a comment with your favorite tip or takeaway. You will be in the running to win that book. I will pick 2 names on Friday, June 11th, so there's still time. Now, to continue this conversation around personal safety, my guest today is so well positioned to talk about it, and her story is so compelling. I can't wait for you to meet her. Her name is Lenora Claire. Lenora is a media personality, casting director, TV producer, art curator, and victims' rights advocate. She is a woman who truly does it all, and her story really begins by being the focus and attention of a high-profile celebrity stalker.
I do not in any way believe that people who have these issues or schizophrenia, or my stalker is schizoaffective, which is the combination of schizophrenia and bipolar. I don't think all people who deal with that are dangerous, however my stalker is. So I just always like to make that very clear before I get started.
Lenora turned that story upside down on its head, figured out how to be her own best advocate, and now she shares that with the rest of the world. She's been on TV shows, including Crime Watch Daily, Dr. Oz. Vice called her the Erin Brockovich of stalking. Her story is unbelievable. Can't wait for you to hear it. Please note that this topic and conversation deals with some sensitive and graphic information of things that actually happened to her. If those are going to be triggering for you, I want you to know that in advance. Also, Lenora gives a lot of helpful information and resources, all of which can be found in the show notes. So please check those out and make sure to learn more about her work and ways you can protect yourself. I'm really grateful for people like Lenora who take what they've learned and share it with others. As you know, I am very passionate about expanding the genre of true crime to include conversations just like this one. Lenora, thank you so much for killing the small talk. Lenora, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I am thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. So
I have talked to a lot of people that have more than one job or title. It's not that unusual to be an author and a journalist, but you are a multi-hyphenate in a way that I haven't seen in a while. You do a lot of things, and they're all super interesting. So could you introduce yourself formally, what you do, and please be liberal in your description. And then we'll zero in on a lot of your story and your work as it pertains to stalking and personal safety. But talk to me about your story and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I actually started off originally as an entertainment journalist. Most people don't know that. That's what I did in my 20s when print media was a viable career option. And then I went into the even more stable world of art, which I did that for years too. I owned art galleries. That's actually how my stalker found me. So I did art for a long time. And then after that, I got into television, which I've done for well over a decade now. I'm the reality TV casting producer and producer. That's what pays the bills. And I am a multi-crime survivor, which I'm sure we'll be getting into all of that, as well as advocate and activist. I've recently joined the Los Angeles District Attorney Crime Victims Advisory Board, which is pretty awesome. It's the first one ever in Los Angeles. And it's a board which they chose 9 of us from around the city, and I'm there representing gender-based crimes. And it's our job to sort of bring issues from the community into the DA's office and victim services and make sure, we bridge the gap and get the needs of what people actually need, right? So I've been doing that. I do a lot of TV. I do a lot of on camera. I do a lot of, discussing what happened to me, as well as legislation that I'm working on and my activism. So there's more, but I there's a lot. You're right. I'm a multi-hyphen person. I've done a lot of things, and I hope to do more.
I love it. Well, let's start with your story. So you mentioned you owned an art gallery, and this is how a stalker found you. And this is what really led you to doing some of this advocacy work. So unfortunately, a man with mental health problems zeroed in on you, and this happened over the course of quite a long time. So can you talk about him finding you and what you
Yeah.
tried to do to help the situation and what did and didn't work in that process.
Yeah, I always sort of preface before I get into it. My dad was a psychiatrist, and I have a lot of empathy for people who are mentally ill. And I do not in any way believe that people who have these issues or schizophrenia, or my stalker is schizoaffective, which is the combination of schizophrenia and bipolar. I don't think all people who deal with that are dangerous. However, my stalker is. So I just always like to make that very clear before I get started. The way that my story sort of unfolded was it was 2011. And I was named one of the LA Weekly People of the Year because I'd opened this art gallery that was really fun. We are doing all these like great events. So it was a really fun time in my life. And my stalker, his real name is Justin Massler, but he legally had it changed to Cloud Star Chaser. So we can interchangeably call him both. He is a man about my age, from a very privileged family, went to all the best schools. His mental illness, to my understanding, hit sometime in his late teens. So he was out stalking Ivanka Trump. Again, this is 2011. So very different time, very different Ivanka Trump out in New York. Of course, I have no idea. I'm living my life in LA. So he's arrested multiple times. He tried to kill himself in her store. She's having problems with him in New York. I don't know any of this. So he jumps bail. He comes to LA. He opens up the LA Weekly. He sees a photograph of me. I'm friends with the capuchin monkey. So I'm in this photo with a capuchin monkey. So for whatever reason, he became intrigued by it. He decided to come to my art gallery wearing a spacesuit. And I'm someone who's used to kind of like art shenanigans and quirky characters. So I don't think anything of it. I'm just like, okay, Ziggy Stardust, whatever, spaceman. And we talk. And he looked at me and he starts talking about graphic novels. And I could tell he's intelligent, but off. And then he looks at me and he goes, "You look like Jessica Rabbit." And I was like, "Yeah, I hear that a lot. Thanks." And he goes, "And I'm going to stalk you." And I was just like, "Excuse me." And so I kicked him out and I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, weird thing, whatever. I mean, he left when I kicked him out. So it was like, I thought it was over.
Sure.
And then a couple days later, a bunch of friends start pointing me to different news stories. And they're like, Ivanka Trump's stalker, picked up by bounty hunters to face trial and whatever. And it was him. And I was like, oh my God, this guy. So he goes to Rikers Island, and it was there that he started sending me these very lengthy, at first they started just sort of like really unhinged ramblings, not threats, just like nonsensical stuff. And I was like, okay, disturbing, but whatever. And then they very rapidly started to escalate to incredibly graphic rape and death threats. So when I first got them, I brought them to LAPD, who were like, well, you qualify for restraining order, but this guy doesn't even live in the state. We don't know where he is. He's homeless, doesn't have an address. You're never going to be able to serve him. So good luck to you. They're very dismissive. So I was like, okay. So, they just continued on and on and on and on. And then it started going into emails and social media. So then I started to figure out like, okay, I learned how to track an IP, because if you do that, you can sort of get a vague area, because he bounced around the country. So I was like, if he was in New York, I felt safe that day. And if he was in San Francisco, I know he's close to me. Come to LA, like I would be on heightened alert. So I have to explain that he goes between being in love with me, and he also has a disorder called erotomania, where they have a false relationship that doesn't really exist. Like if you think about the David Letterman stalker, we see that a lot, right?
Sure.
So on one sort of side of the spectrum is the, you're my wife, blah, 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 stuff like that. And then I also get these really angry, aggressive, manic outbursts, which are, you're the leader of a Zionist conspiracy, and I need to kidnap, kill, and rape you and gas you through your door with Zyklon B, because he knows I'm Jewish. That's what killed my relatives in the Holocaust. I'm going to gas you through your door with Zyklon, like very awful, awful stuff. And anyway, so I'm getting all these emails, and it's upsetting. It's scary. I'm kind of like working through this as all this stuff is happening. And then my mentor in casting, he's just an incredible person who gave me my job that I love very much, like family. My stalker sent him a death threat, which was really terrifying, because everybody in the casting office, a casting office has like a revolving door. People come in and out, right? And then everybody's so afraid of workplace violence. So they Google my stalker. They see, oh, he tried to kill himself in a Ivanka store, history of workplace violence. So everybody in the office is terrified. And what ended up happening is, they just didn't bring me back. Like I've been working consistently for this person for years, and like suddenly I'm just not brought back. So, again, it's fine. I'm not mad at it. It's how it worked out. So I lose my job. But so that's the other thing people don't realize with stalking, is that it really comes at all ends. Like they try to, infiltrate your work life, your personal life, everything.
He has infiltrated your life, so it's not just your personal space and sphere. It's moved into work and your home life, where you never feel 100% safe.
You nailed it. So then at that point, I then go in, and I want to specify it was a Northeast division of LAPD. with my stack of rape and death threats. He's now like, I have all these like voicemails from him threatening my boss, all that stuff. And I thought for sure they would do something to help me. And I shit you not, Northeast Division of LAPD, the officer looks at me and says, I think you should just like dye your hair so you got less. For listeners, they don't know what I look like. I do have neon red hair and I have for 20 something years. But they said, we think you should dye your hair and get off the internet. That was their solution to me. And I was just like, wow, okay. And I got really pissed off because, you know, I'm also somebody working in TV, and I was like, fuck you very much.
That's your livelihood.
My livelihood. So I don't know if you know who Billy Jensen is. He's
Sure.
kind of, okay, so Billy's an old friend of mine. I knew him back when he had an emo haircut before he did anything. I've known him that long. Billy had just started on a show called Crime Watch Daily. So he was a producer there. So that was the first place I went really public with my story. And that was like in 2015, just to give everybody a timeline. And that was actually really important for a lot of reasons, because that episode teamed me up with this incredible woman, Rhonda Saunders. And Rhonda was the ADA when the actress Rebecca Schaefer, which is sort of known as the first big stalking. I mean, there's had been stalking stuff, but that was the first sort of pop culture, you know.
Yep.
For the listeners who don't know that case, she was this really beautiful actress who was actually reading the script for Pretty Woman at the time that her stalker came to her door. So if you think about that, if she hadn't been murdered on her front doorstep, she might have had Julia Roberts' career, right? So let's just like think about that. All the loss, all the potential, everything. By all accounts, was just a really wonderful woman. So that case happened, shocked America, right? This popular TV star murdered by her stalker. Because back then they handled things differently. Apparently the studios have been getting death threats and no one thought to tell her because no one took it seriously. So Rhonda, in all of, she's such a fabulous woman. She created the first legislation for stalking, not only California, but the entire country, which passed in 1992. But note when I say 1992, because there's no updates, and what a different world we live in from 1992. So I do this show that Billy put me on with Rhonda, and she becomes this like mentor in this world. And I start coming up with legislative proposals, and I want to do a restraining order registry. And I'm thinking about all this stuff, and I start working with her, and I'm so inspired by her. And through like a strange series of events, I'm friends with Polly Perrette, who people might remember from NCIS. She was on for a very long time. She had her own stalking situation. We did a 48 Hours episode together, and she connected me to Congressman Adam Schiff, who he was just our local congressman. He wasn't head of House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, and he's another wonderful person. So I had, you know, a good amount of access to him at that point, right? Because it's like 2015. So we start working together and kind of going over ideas, and, you know, so that ball sort of starts rolling. Then we started filming the 48 Hours episode. It was a 2-hour episode. My story is like the anchor story in the last hour. In the first hour, it's Polly and 2 other women who I've grown very close with their own awful stalking ordeals. And while we were filming, they sort of 48 hours without telling me, they interviewed my stalker. And he gave him a full interview. So I have the thing nobody has, which is my stalker being completely batshit, making threats, admitting to stalking me, to Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours. So I have this incredible evidence. So I want to backtrack and say that when I went public with my story before this, people would look at me and they would be like, oh, that girl just wants attention. And the thing is, I've done TV my whole life. If I wanted attention, that has never been a problem for me. Nobody wants this kind of attention. So, you know, that's a whole other conversation. But now with that footage, once people saw it, they're like, oh my God, this is terrifying. So what ended up happening was CBS realized, oh God, this is a thing. And there's an incredible forensic psychologist named Chris Mahandi, who's just a real legend. And he did the largest study of stalkers in North America. He interviewed 1,000. He's such a wonderful man. So I wasn't friends with him at that point, but they gave my case over to him and he looked at it and he said, no, this woman's in danger. So what ended up happening was 48 Hours ended up getting my stalker through everything. He was picked up in Utah, right, which is where he was, and put into a psych facility. So I was like, fabulous. This is what I want. He needs help. And so for the first time in years, I'm not getting these constant rape, death, and kidnap threats. So I'm like, woo, this is great. So then the election happens. Trump wins. I'm devastated. And I have to explain all this timeline wise. So about a week after the election, I'm walking my dog and I get a phone call. It was LAPD and Secret Service. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a friend. I just said, I was like, what? Like, I thought it was somebody just like clowning me. And it wasn't. What happened was my stalker had escaped the mental institution because, as he likes to say, he's like the Joker from Batman. And normally, like, I also used to joke that I won the stalking lottery, and that because of Ivanka now being their first daughter, that, you know, I'm like the only person to benefit from this presidency because now maybe they'll take my case seriously. So as a matter of fact, when he escaped, because normally the states don't all work together, right? So I would not have known that I was at a high level of risk. I wouldn't have known. So I get this call and they're like, don't worry, we'll get him. And sure enough, they did. He had been caught a block away from Trump Tower. And it's my understanding he wasn't even allowed to be in the state of New York. So your state, by the way, New York, has some of the most garbage laws when it comes to stalking. I bet you didn't know this, but in 2014, your state court, they said that a death threat over electronic device, so email or text, it's, freedom of speech. And so that's not even a crime in New York. So think about that right there. So anyway, so
why does that not surprise me? Sadly, New Yorkers are so crazy. Like, they're like, well, that's just run of the mill communications. This is okay. Keep going.
Right. So oddly enough, California has some of the best stalking laws in the country, probably because of, all the celebrities, even though, which is so ironic because just to give people, some stats, 7.5 million Americans, the CDC says, are being stalked. Obviously, that's underreported. And clearly not all 7.5 and more are celebrities. And also another stat that I want people to know is that even though like my story has kind of become the face of stalking in America because I do all the media, I am not representational of what usually you find. Usually it's so 97% is typically intimate partner, like domestic violence overlap, like that kind of a thing. I'm in the 3% with someone I didn't know. So even though those
that tracks with homicide statistics,
Correct.
right? We're so much more likely to be hurt by someone who knows us than the random serial killer. Those are such outliers. So that's interesting about stalking. What you're describing is very, very rare.
Correct. And I'm in the even weirder sort of space where I'm in the most messed up space, which is where I get the attention like a celebrity would get because I'm like in media and stuff, but I don't make any money. At this time, I was living in a shitty studio apartment. You know what I mean? I'm not a Kardashian in a gated community. So
Right.
you see this culture with like YouTube influencers and bloggers where they get extra attention. So they have the extra possibility, not to mention the internet is a real breeding ground. For example, erotomania before, if you were just bent that way, okay. But now you know my dog's name and things about me. So if you think we're in a thing, right, now you really think it. So that's a scary place to exist in. So I just always like to explain that. It's like, yeah, the stories you might hear about, but okay, like Kim Kardashian as a stalker, that's not representational of what's really happening. And part of that, and I always say that stalking sort of where like sexual assault was in the 70s, it's so misunderstood, is because when people come forward with the stories, they're usually celebrities because the regular woman, where it's the ex-husband, they have children together, like the last thing she wants is more attention. So that's why I always say I have to be twice as loud for everybody else.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really intense feeling.
Right. And in addition to not having, a protected, gated, literal and figurative fence around your life, Ivanka, she has a security detail and all the power
Totally.
of the Secret Service. So had
Totally.
that not been happening concurrently to your story, the story could have been really different for your risk before they got him.
Right. So now we're at 2016. So he's in jail for a couple of months. And at this point, Vice did an article on me that called me the Aaron Brockovich of stalking, which
I read
then
that
went
one.
viral. Yeah. So when that went viral, and I'm telling you, since that article came out, not one day has gone by where somebody, because I did a lot of TV after and whatever resulting, where I've done personally over 100 restraining orders. 100, and I stopped counting after 100. I'm like, it's not a frozen yogurt punch card, whatever. We know I did 100. I can do plenty, So I go to court. I do human shield in court. I do all of that. So that's where like the activism started. Right now, we're trying to do this restraining order registry, and I'm also I proposed years ago. What I'm trying to do is trying to create an app that'd be given to victims, which would give you warning if your stalker was in proximity. So say that your restraining order was 3,000 feet. You get a ding, 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 stalkers within 3,000 feet, giving you warning to be able to do something. So I'm trying to do that right now. It's like one of my 8 million things I'm trying to do. I start working with victims. It just starts like this intensity, just this passion, because I realize my situation is this bad, but I'm sitting on a mountain of privilege, right? So once I really recognized that, I was like, wow, there's communities who get no help, no resources, nobody takes them seriously, sex workers, people of color, we go on and on, LGBTQ. So I start doing all of this work, and my stalker then comes to LA. He's actively looking for me. He knows that I'm responsible for putting him in jail. At this point, I had just started dating my husband. So we're like, imagine you're like a new couple And luckily my husband's an entertainment attorney, so he's used to his own amount of crazy shit. But so my stalker comes to LA, starts writing him threats, goes to where I get my eyelashes done, tries to kidnap my dog. So my stalker had already been stalking Kim Kardashian, and I knew this. And so I had been communicating with her, like very intense ex-Mossad security team. And I'm thinking, nobody is scarier than ex-Mossad. They are going to catch him. So then my stalker writes me and tells me, I know you go to LA Comic-Con. I'm going to kidnap you from there. And so what he didn't know is that I know the owners of LA Comic-Con. So I worked with them. You know, we had extra security. We didn't want to scare the kids. They were always safe. I will say they did an amazing job. What we did, we got extra security, dressed them up as Batman and Superman so they wouldn't scare the children. So the security team, Batman and Superman, hold him down, deliver him to LAPD.
This is cinematic. Sorry. This could not be a more LA story.
Oh, I know.
Like they're literally dressed as superheroes. Sorry.
Batman and Superman, I know. So they catch him. They deliver him to LAPD. The Kardashians serve the restraining order, which I knew. Out of nowhere, Gwyneth Paltrow serves her restraining order. And no one's ever been, again, my husband is a defamation attorney, so I'm like very careful with my language, not to say the wrong thing. I know there was some incident with my stalker and Gwyneth Paltrow's children. No one will tell me what happened, but something to merit a restraining order, something pertaining to her children. Also, my stalker stalks many, many people, including a ton of girls he went to high school with. Like, this is a problem person, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is a thing.
Serial offender. Yeah.
Serial offender. So I catch my stalker. It took 1 year. He was on $1 million bail, which is intense. And so he was, a year until it would have been a trial. Well, it wasn't because he took a plea. So, right. So he took the plea. I got him on felony stalking max, which is a 4-year sentence in California. But important to note that there was a proposition that passed a few years prior called 57, which I get why people passed. I understand it. And it was sort of, the language was put out as nonviolent offenders get reduced sentencing, which sounds great. Like people, dumb cannabis offenses, get them out. I don't care. What they don't explain, and it's going to shock you when I tell you the list of crimes that California considers nonviolent. Are you ready? Rape of an unconscious person, forced sodomy, human trafficking, stalking. These are right. And I remember saying to the old DA who's now gone, is rape of an unconscious person nonviolent because they're unconscious and they can't fight back? Like, what's the law? Like, this is disgusting. So because of that, my stalker, instead of his 4 years, which I worked very hard to get, he only served 2.
Wow.
So he got out 2 months after my wedding. I planned it so I could have my wedding without, because people don't understand how much it's just destroys your life, right? So he got out, that would be December of 2019. And he reoffended within 3 days. He was making YouTube videos about me. He's gone back a few times, but then because of COVID, they just release everybody really quickly. So it's not done.
And he's in California, to your knowledge, right now?
Los Angeles. He's in LA. I know where he is, wearing an ankle monitor.
Okay. There's a lot I want to unpack from your story. So that's the current status. He does wear an ankle bracelet. He wears a monitor?
Yes, he wears a monitor.
I mean, that's good. Your idea for this app, that's like preemptive activity. It's like a sex offender registry before you move into a neighborhood. It's so smart. How viable is that?
Gas got our new DA. He's ultra progressive DA, but he loves tech. So he's very intrigued by it. We've had a lot. I actually recently, I don't know if it's going to get approved, but I'll talk about it. I actually pitched a stalking task force to the LA DA's office. And if they approve it, you would get so in the in-between time, because there's no bail in LA anymore. So had my case happened now that there's no bail, he would have been arrested and immediately released, right? And that's when, because stalking is different than other crimes, because, if it's a sexual assault, and I say this with the most sensitivity as someone who has survived that as well. So please don't think I'm ever minimizing. I've fortunately a multi-violent crime survivor, but, with a sexual assault, there's the incident and then it's done, right? And then you can begin to heal and work through that. With stalking, you never it's just going and go, right? So it's that, and it's just escalating and continuing on. So it's a unique crime, because usually if it's a robbery, you rob, it's done, right? So what we want to do with the stalking task force is you get, first of all, because right now what happens are cops are the gatekeepers, and the cops usually, it's not their fault. They're not trained. It's there's so many things I'm not a specialist in. So, the cops will see the threats And they might dismiss it. They might say, oh, it's shit talk. I mean, that's what happened to me. They just do that. They're not trained. They're not forensic psychologists. So what we would do is we'd have forensic psychologists on staff to evaluate, do risk assessment on what they're seeing, right? And so then if you were like red flagged as being like in danger, then you'd have a care team dispatched to you, which would include, someone would do security walkthroughs of your home and be like, okay, we got to tighten this up, bring camera here, lights here, trim that bush, whatever. And then you'd get, because there's so much of a tech element to this crime now, you'd get a tech person coming through and making sure they're not surveilling you. Oh, what, you clicked a thing for 50% off at Sephora? Well, girl, they're now in the GPS on your phone. Right. A lot of people don't know these things, or there's GPS trackers on cars. You get them for $50, right? So we would dispatch a care team to sort of help you with all these things. And that would really change everything. So I hope it gets approved. If it doesn't, I'm going to keep trying.
And if it doesn't, do I remember reading that there is not a stalking task unit, but a sort of, would this fall under the threat management unit?
Right. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Why didn't they deploy that for you?
Well, it doesn't exist. Okay, so just to be clear, so TMU, the threat management unit, is only for celebrities. The only reason, celebrities who have a lot of resources. So the only reason why my case was there was because I was on TV. I was stalked for years. My crime had not been any different. It was only because I was on TV that my case went there. So most people, if you're being stalked in Los Angeles, you don't even know this exists. LAPD doesn't tell you. So let's be very clear about that. TMU handles like Madonna's stalker, Spielberg stalker, those kinds of cases. LAPD, they got rid of sex crimes division on January 1st. So there's a lot going on right now. Like there is no stalking unit at LAPD. There's just TMU, which is the specialized elite stalking unit for celebs. I will say this, I was not a fan of the person who was running TMU at the time. However, they have a really wonderful woman right now who I think is really great, and that's going to change things. But unfortunately, she wasn't running the unit when all this went down. So I did not have the benefit of her.
I am so excited to talk to you about Canva. Canva is a graphic design platform where you can create social media graphics, presentations, posters, documents, any visual content you need, you can make on Canva. I am in marketing and I have used Canva for years, way before they were a partner of DIE-ALOGUE podcast. The Canva platform is free to use, but also offers a paid subscription called Canva Pro, which I use because I can upload custom fonts and my brand colors. Honestly, anything you need to do, you can do it on Canva. I make pitch decks, memes, my newsletters. Now, if you want to get in on Canva, listeners of DIE-ALOGUE can try Canva Pro for free for 45 days when you sign up via my exclusive link. That link is partner.canva.com/diehard. Don't worry, you don't have to remember it. It's in the show notes. So head over there, use that link and start creating. Seriously, you're going to have so much fun. partner.canva.com/diehard. Okay, and for what reason, other than money, which is usually the reason for everything, would that not be a more democratic approach to stalking cases within that unit? Is it just, I guess it's optics and publicity and bad press. If celebrities don't feel safe in LA, then that's bad news for LA.
Yeah, I mean, also there's a history behind it. So like 30 years ago, it was started because it's my understanding that a lot of the heads of security at really after Rebecca Schaefer got murdered. And then all of the studio heads were like, we can't have this. And so that's how TMU was born from that. And it is a good thing. However, so TMU was really ahead of its time. There was nothing else like it in the country. There still isn't. However, it stopped there. That's
right.
The problem.
It didn't evolve and grow and progress.
Correct. So I'm not shitting on TMU. It's just very limited what it can do, but it's not meant to do more than that. So it's really, it exists within its own thing.
I see.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to pivot too far away from this topic, but it feels connected. Is defunding the police impacting the support and services of LAPD? This is a conversation I'm really trying to have on the podcast because we have so much work to do to make policing more fair everywhere in the country. But I don't know that taking funds away is the right idea because it seems like you need more funds to make sure you can have this care team. This sounds expensive is what I'm hearing. So where does that fit into the way you think about it and your work with the LAPD?
Yeah. So right now I'm working with the DA's office, not
Okay.
LAPD. I hope to work with LAPD. I actually wrote an op-ed because I write sometimes still for the LA Weekly. And it was about how, it's a really weird place to be in when you identify as a progressive person who sees the need for systemic change. However, you're also a crime victim. So whereas some of my friends are like, burn it all down, I'm like, and I get why you think that. But I'm like, but what's the solution? So I'm kind of in this weird space where I'm like, oh, change needs to happen, but we can't leave victims hanging in the wind either. So for example, my idea of a care team, they're not LAPD, right? It's a forensic psychologist, it's a tech expert, it's a security expert. So I think, and again, I am not the defund the police expert. I think it's about creating these social services. Maybe in a perfect world, it would all just run through a local police department, or maybe this runs through a DA office, or there's a DOJ grant to pay for it.
Mm.
That's one of the things I'm exploring right now. Right. So I'm very careful with this conversation about defunding the police because, it's the brutality that exists is just, I think we both feel very similarly about that. But at the same time, what's the solution to protect victims? I'm so open. I just need to hear what those things are. And
Yeah.
that's not, I'm just hearing the pain, which is very understandable. The pain is that we cannot continue to exist in this way. But I don't think we've gotten to the part, or at least I'm not hearing the clear answers. I know people are saying diverting money to social services, but it's just a really painful topic.
It's
It's really
painful and
hard.
it's complex. I know there aren't simple answers, and I didn't want to
Yeah.
suggest that you should have them. I'm just curious in your work if it's come up, and I'm sure as you continue to work with the DA
Every
office,
day.
it's going to
Every
be
day.
it's going to be more and more part of what
I
you
mean,
do.
Gascon is like, there's like 3 ultra progressive DAs in this country, of which he is one.
Yeah.
And, so like, you might actually really enjoy the article I wrote, which is like, basically like, I agree with some of his things, not all of his things. It's all about
Yeah.
nuance. So, to me,
Right.
it's not black and white.
Well, and not for nothing in this whole conversation, your stalker is not getting the help he needs either in all of this. This has been like a
Correct.
catch and release. I mean, he was at Rikers, he was at a mental institution, which is probably
All
where
over.
he belongs, and was able to escape. So, meanwhile, not only are there victims, there are perpetrators who, whether they're beyond rehabilitation or not is way above my pay grade, but somebody needs to be on top of that. And he's not going to be moving in a better direction if this doesn't
Right.
change either.
Right. And that's why I'm like, okay, if we're doing this move away from incarceration, then at least let me protect myself with this ankle monitor app so I know if he's near me, because the threat is to me.
Absolutely. It
Right.
feels like
So,
that has to be possible. I don't know if you know the Citizen app. It's in LA now, but we got it
oh, yeah.
first in New York, right? That's
Yeah, I love it.
crowdsourced
Hmm.
crime, to the minute what's going on in your neighborhood. It feels
Yeah.
like if that's possible, this is possible.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we're exploring it. It comes down to money, but I've pitched it. I'm advocating for it constantly.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I guess there's personal rights issues with the perpetrator. I'm sure that's what makes it messy, but maybe
Yes.
there has to be some thresholds where you have to
I have the workaround.
yeah, tell me.
The workaround is, look, I don't need ACLU up my ass. I'm not trying to follow somebody all the time. But if my protective order is 3,000 feet, then that is what it is, right? I'm not monitoring the individual the rest of the time. I've just, the court ordered stay away, whatever. That's the sort of geofencing area around me, and that's the workaround. And that, to me,
Right.
and again, like, believe me, I'm married to a lawyer and I fight all day long with him. So I have to go. No, but it's really great because before, as just a regular private citizen, I would just be like, do it. And now I'm like, all right, now I gotta have the answers for everything. Okay, here we go.
Absolutely. And at a certain point, when the crime is serious enough and there's a repeat offense, you do have to give up some of your freedoms. That is a lot of what our system is based on. That's
Right.
sex registry,
Right.
sex offender registry. Way back in the beginning of your story, you talked about learning how to identify IP addresses. What are some other things that you've learned to do that help you and protect you? What are things we can do to be more safe?
Yeah. So, okay, I could actually pull up your home address right now and a bunch of personal information. So I tell people, and I'm happy to, I don't know if for your listeners, I can give you a link that helps you go to all the truth finders, whatever, to wipe yourself off, because people don't realize for a whole $1, I can find out like everything about you, where your relatives live, but I can find out all of that. So definitely like wipe that shit away.
So you can
Um,
do that. Any citizen can access that and scrub it?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's just it's an annoying afternoon because you got to like there's a bunch of them, but like give yourself a couple hours. It's worth potentially saving your life. That's a really
Absolutely.
big one. Another one is I have an affiliation with, and again, I'm not just pushing this company. It's a bracelet called Flare, and what Flare is, it's like a bangle bracelet, and there's a button on the side where if you're at risk, you have the option of you push it and it either alerts it sends your GPS to 5 trusted people or calls 911. So there's a couple different devices like that on the market. I think
Wow.
that's like a really cool thing, because sometimes you can't get to your phone, or especially in DV situations, the person might confiscate your phone because that's
Oh
a,
my
a means of
gosh.
control. And
Yeah.
it really, like, I could pull it out. It just looks like a bracelet. Like, no one will clock it. No one would ever know.
And is it easy to avoid activating it if you don't want to? Like you're not going to do it
I
accidentally?
haven't done it yet.
That's
I
good.
mean,
Okay. Yeah, I'd
yeah.
love to link that in the show notes. That's great.
Yeah, so there's that. Definitely don't click on anything suspicious because you can really easily get to the GPS of your phone. In fact, unless you're driving somewhere, or just turn off your location services. Also, don't forget that there's a lot of information in the photos that you upload, and you may actually be literally giving a map to where you are. So, like, let's be really mindful of that.
Are you cognizant of your posting times? Do you post things after the fact? If you're in a location, do you wait till you're not there?
Yeah, totally. Under non-COVID times when we're out having a good time, I never post where I am. I tell them, do not tag me in shit until I am so long gone. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's like really important. That's a
Yeah.
big one.
Yeah. It's so helpful. And, not that it would ever be any one person's fault should they be targeted, which we both
Totally.
know
We
that,
don't,
but
yeah.
it's empowering to feel like there are things we can do. And to hear that they told you not to color your hair and to get off social
Oh,
media,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
like
yeah.
the stalking version of, well, what were you
Don't wear a
wearing?
miniskirt.
Did you
Right.
ask
And
for it? Like,
I've called them out. I even at the time I was like, hey, Ivanka's conventional looking with blonde hair and he stalked her first. So let's not play this game.
right.
People are always just like, oh, do you want to tone down your look? And I'm like, absolutely not, because that's not, you know what I mean? Like, so many times for safety. And I don't look, whatever anyone needs to do to feel safe. If dyeing your hair makes you feel safe, then you do that, right? But for me, it was like, I am not minimizing myself. I am not being small or quiet or lesser because you can't handle my existence. Like, that's not, no.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I think making yourself smaller and minimizing yourself is such a great way to put it because he's already diminished so much of your life. He's already like boxed you in so many ways that your physical expression of yourself should not have to change.
Yeah, and I have this theory. It was like once I started working with, victims and survivors, and I use the term interchangeably because people identify differently, right? So when I started working with victims and survivors, at first I was like, wow, all these people are so cool. And then I was like, I wonder if they're so cool. Like, I wonder if we're just, because they became like friends, like a
Sure.
lot of people. And I was like, oh, is it just because we're like bonded through our trauma? And I was like, no, that gives all these people a disservice. All these people are exceptional people. And that's when I started coming up with, I call it my extra sparkly theory.
Hmm.
And I really feel that a lot of people who were stalked, they're, what I'm seeing, at least anecdotally, is that they're really charismatic, attractive, successful, and they're given field. Like, basically they got it going on, right? And so then you've got these offenders, these predators, who they themselves are not shit, and they want to obtain and possess all of which they are not. And that's
Hmm.
what it comes. And I see that over and over and over again. So
Right.
it's definitely, like, again, I haven't qualified it with a study, but I can tell you anecdotally that's what I see.
Yeah, so their deficiency, they, are seeking out someone who has an abundance. And it's like this, I'm sure it's subconscious too. What about the gender makeup? Are a lot of the victim survivors you work with women? I would assume, but how many are men? And also for perpetrators, like I can't remember, was Letterman's stalker a woman? It
Yeah,
was.
there's a lot of famous cases with women who are stalkers. Michael Douglas famously has one. I mean, it's largely women that it happens to, but I've dealt with men. I've dealt with lots of LGBTQ stories, which unfortunately are not always treated with the most respect, especially when it's male on male. Sometimes judges are like, you could take them, like they're just kind of like really archaic
Wow.
attitudes. It's definitely overwhelmingly women. So the statistics are really weird with stalking, right? Because so much is underreported. Like, homicide's different because you have a body. So you unless someone's missing, but for the most part, like, we know they have it. Stalking is really up in the air. And when I started working, with victim survivors, I was mostly working with white women. And I thought but I was like, no, I think white women are just comfortable coming to me because I'm a white woman. What I started to realize is that there's a lot of women of color, obviously, like they're stalked too. They're just not coming forward in the same way, or that's to say they're not getting justice. So if you're looking at the stats, it's white women like me that come, right, but that's not like, so that's what's horrifying, right? And so that's another part of the Stalking Task Force, is we wanted to build in a whole thing that outreaches to different communities for, education prevention, because it's happening just as much there, obviously. It's just we're not seeing that.
Our system's not designed to protect a lot of marginalized humans, right? So if you don't feel that you are going to be heard and protected, then yeah, you'd be hesitant. And if your community happens to be often harassed or terrorized by the very same people who are supposed to protect you, of course you're not moving forward.
Right. And then add the complexity. Like I was working with a Black female survivor who said that she didn't call the police on the Black man who was stalking her, because even though she was terrified, she didn't want to get him killed. Like that's a whole other level. That's a whole other level, right? I know it's so painful and awful to think about, right? And that is a thing. It's a thing. So we really have to be honest and address this, or we're never going to make it better. I know.
That is so much for a woman to carry.
It's so much.
In addition to what happened to her, I am really feeling the weight of that. That is really important to hear, though. I'm glad you shared that. Yeah. And, to your earlier point about this being in the middle, it's so lonely in the middle. It's messier. It's gray. It's not black and white. But I do think it's where we have to start digging our way out of this. This binary thinking around criminal justice is not going to work. So I'm grateful that you're loudly being in that middle space and trying to come up with new solutions, because what's been happening isn't working.
To me, it's like it's just on this particular issue again. It's so polarizing, the black and whiteness of it all.
Yeah,
and that it isn't that. There's so much that exists in the gray.
The gray is maybe a better, more accurate description, because middle does imply like a centrist point of view, which isn't even what maybe we're talking about or after. It's more just like being in the middle where the answers aren't as clear. Like QAnon was born out of extreme right thinking, and, dangerous ideologies come out of the super polar sides. Right. So in the middle, I think the truth is always somewhere in the middle. Like that's what they say, right? So that's more what I'm going for. But yeah, have you ever heard the Margaret Atwood quote? I've quoted it so many times, but now I actually attribute it to the author because I've learned my lesson. Men are afraid women will laugh at them, and women are afraid men will kill them.
Kill them. Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of why I'm starting this very short series on self-protection. And because I ask women all the time on here for a year and a half, like, what got you into true crime? And a lot of them say it's educational. I feel like if I watch these other stories, I might glean something that I can use later to protect myself. I mean, there is like an intrinsic, innate fear in many of us. And so I think that's just as much a reason to consume true crime as any other. We talked briefly about technology. Things not changing from the 90s. I think I read that you are proposing, and this might already happen, that warrants are served via email.
I love you for doing your research. No one ever does your research. You do more research than TV producers. It's incredible. So my friend Jess, who I mentioned earlier, together we started the Innovative Justice Alliance.
Yes.
That's like our brand new thing. And she's a lawyer in the corporate world, and she works for a big tech company. And my interest is just, like, I'm one of those people who's just like always looking towards the future in tech, right? So part of the difficulty that I personally experienced for the first 5 years, where, like I told you, like the police were like, yeah, you qualify for restraining order, but if you don't know where he is, like, what are you going to do? And so, now that I'm with a lawyer, I'm like, precedent. And I go, we have precedent. And for things like, what do you call it? Foreclosure notices, right? Like you can email those to people and it's acceptable. So if you send me a death threat via email, why can't I return it with a protective order? And there's ways to track if something's been opened or not. So even though, and here's the thing, so I get this bullshit too when people go, ankle monitor ideas, they're not foolproof. And I always look at them and I say, either are condoms, but I'm going to wear one because most of the time they do what they're supposed to do. And I want some protection. Nothing is foolproof. Yeah. So it's all about the idea of risk minimization, right? It's like we're doing all the things to lower our risk. That's all it is. Nothing is 100%. And that's just the world we live in. But if we just keep doing the things to lower and lower risk, look, I'm still here 10 years later. This man's obsessed with killing and raping me and kidnapping me. And he has not gotten anywhere near me because I do all the risk minimization. And it is not easy, but it is possible. And I am living proof, right? So yes, I want to be able to do electronic process and delivery of restraining orders. The ankle monitor app. Jess has some really cool ideas. I wish she was here. I'm going to describe it poorly, but it has something to do with facial recognition technology in your door. And like, if you're the bad person, like you wouldn't be able to get through, wow. Right? I know, it's fucking cool. She's so smart. So like, I just poorly gave you her idea, but you get what I mean. So that's what we're trying to do. And Innovative Justice Alliance, like we're teaming up with all these like amazing lawyers and forensic psychologists and people in the tech industry. And we're just trying to take this space that no one's really occupied and sort of trying to work, because so much of our lives involves tech. So even like the Flare bracelet, right? And there's tons of things like that. It's like, that if that was given to like if we have our stalking task force, which I hope is approved, and everybody got one of these bracelets, that's one more thing to protect yourself, right? So
yeah, no, it's time for innovation. It's like innovation just stopped in government agencies, and I don't just mean the police force, just like the post office. Like you go there, it takes 2 hours to get through there and like send a box. It's like, it is time to innovate. There are better ways to do things and there's new ways. And we have to kind of give up these old norms of like, no, it has to be physical paper served in person. I understand legally why they do that and the confirmation of receipt, but it's a new day and the world is very big and people have access to the world via the internet. So that's not going to cut it anymore.
I'd also pitched, and so I pitched this when I got brought on the board. I'm not trying to take the credit because apparently there were people talking about it anyway. But I was like, we need, because like when your case is at the DA, this is like the worst time of your life because some terrible crime has happened to you. And you don't know, like, for example, is that every state has a victims compensation program. And in California, for example, you're eligible for like $5,000 of therapy. The crime happens to your home, $2,000 to relocate. So I had said, the DA's office needs an app that can be really easily given with like push notifications. For example, like one of the biggest problems is that, look, these DAs are so overworked. No shade towards them. They are busting their ass, but they're working so hard and they may not tell you you've got a hearing coming up until a few days before. If you're a working person with children, so why, like my vet sends me push notifications like time to get your dog vaccinated. Like if we have it, why can't I have that on my phone for like the most important thing going on in my life? It's so simple. And the technology exists. There's, as far as privacy concerns, like hospitals have versions of this. So obviously we can get it can happen.
Oh my gosh, that is so exciting. And it seems like the perfect solution. Absolutely. It's like, and it's like a pre-programmed thing. It's not going to be more work on anybody on the back end. It's like front end work, disperse the information. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to do everything we can to support victims the whole process, including like making sure they can get to where they need to go to finish and see this through. For that victims compensation, which I knew nothing about, where can listeners, if they want that information in their own state, what is the best way to find it?
Just Google your state plus victims compensation and there will be something. Every state has one. Another thing that I've been working on is sort of merging the two worlds I exist in, which is media, television, and crime advocacy. And I just created a consulting business where I work with victims for free. Like if you have a high profile case and need help navigating the media, I help you with that. But it's really where the dollars come for me is production companies. I think there needs to be a higher standard because a lot of times these true crime producers are used to working on homicide stories. They have no idea how to deal with living victim survivors. They don't speak with trauma-informed language. They're constantly re-traumatizing them. It's really terrible. Plus the taste level is like, for example, sorry to call you out, Netflix, but like the Night Stalker documentary, they showed the crime scene photos. Those families are still alive. Like it would have been just as compelling of a story just yanking those out. We have like, I work on a lot of sex shows. We have intimacy coordinators that are sort of liaison, like sort of be like, oh, are you being handled properly? There's nobody doing that. And these true crime producers, like, I get it. You think you know crime, but unless you're a crime survivor yourself, you don't know what our needs are. I had one, she was very nice. And I'm not trying to like say anything bad about her, but they were going to film me for a show. And she's like, yeah, can you show us like all your security systems and what you do? And I was like, do you want my codes? That is the most counterproductive thing for me to possibly do. And it wasn't her fault, but she's not coming from the headspace that I'm in. So like what, and there've been a lot of things that were like wildly inappropriate that I've personally experienced on set. And there was one talk show which I bailed on. I'm not going to say who they are, but it's a major one. It's not Dr. Oz. I do that show. He's very nice. It's not Dr. Oz. It's another talk show. And I was talking to them, and I've been a TV producer for 10 years. Okay. So like, I know their games. And I was like, are you going to bombard me with his family? And that was what they intended to do to me. What if that had happened?
With your
right?
Stalker's family members?
Yes. They kept asking me questions about his family. Right. And I was like, are you inviting them on to be with what? And I'm not talking about 48 hours, because that's a whole other thing. I knew they were going to interview the mom. But this one talk show, right?
Oh my gosh.
You can't do that to me. You can't do this to people. So I've also created this consulting business because the other thing too, which I want to raise the industry, like they're profiting off of our pain. I'm not I love true crime content. My dad was a psychiatrist who went through he was a police surgeon in New York. I could show you his badge. He did a lot of forensics. I grew up with forensics in my home. I grew up with true crime in the home. John Douglas was like a hero to us in the house, right? That's my reality. So I'm not anti-true crime, from like, the fan is not the right word, but follower, whatever you want. Enthusiast, yeah. Right? Thank you. I'm not against that. However, there has to be something about this disconnect where people don't understand that this is not content. These are not stories. These are people, and they have lives and loved ones. And wherever that disconnect is where I'm like, hold up, this is no. And so the other thing too is these media companies, it is big money, true crime right now. They are profiting off of pain. And so I want to raise the industry standard, and I'm about to start calling people out and say, okay, there should be a line item on every TV show. If this is a show about sexual assault, you give X amount of dollars to RAINN. You have to give people something back. Otherwise, you are just exploiting us for our stories.
Oh my gosh, I am loving what you're saying. And sets are so efficient. They're like machines. They have to do as much as possible in as little time as possible. Money is the end goal. Ratings. Yeah. The care of a person's story can be very mishandled. And I really hope that you have great success in that, because that's a win for everybody. Well, Lenora, before you go, I ask all my guests this question, and it's, what gets you up in the morning? Literal, figurative, both.
My dog.
Always. It's always the dog.
Yeah. I have a little miniature pinscher named Nomi, who's amazing. Nomi after the movie Showgirl. She has very long legs from infant. Oh. And she's just my best friend, and she's helped me through all of this. So
good. They do, don't they? They really are so intuitive. Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and your great work. Yeah. I'm going to put all the links that are pertinent to this conversation in the show notes. And thank you so much for killing the small talk.
Yeah. Oh, this is really fun.
DIE-ALOGUE is a Yellowtape media production edited by Jason Usry and produced and hosted by me, Rebecca Sebastian. Please be sure to subscribe to DIE-ALOGUE, a true crime conversation, wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media. We are at DIE-ALOGUE Pod across all platforms. You can also drop me a note or a guest suggestion or sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Be sure to join me every Wednesday for a new episode and another killer conversation.